Hello, everyone. This is David with Let's Talk Theology. I want to thank you for joining us in this podcast. Thank you for being a part of the Let's Talk Theology family, and we hope that everything that we are making available to you is beneficial and is inspiring and motivating. And we hope that it is it's an encouragement to help you study the Word of God more and to consider some of the influential things that have transpired over the history of Christianity's existence. And doing this will help us all gain a clear understanding of how we exist today and why we do some of the things that we do. And perhaps it can help us be even more devout in our practices and traditions as we attempt to serve God. So we thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for viewing. We hope that you will continue to check with us as we continue our studies. All right. So we're going to continue the presentation on the revival series and the study of the pre-Reformation revival. And I believe this is very important because if you are Protestant, and even if you're not a Protestant, really the Reformation has influenced Christianity in a very phenomenal way. It's almost one of those type of events that we cannot ignore. It's very few events within the history of Christianity that we can say that about. But there are some events, and the Protestant Reformation would be one of them, that we just simply cannot ignore. It has impacted all believers, whether in a negative or positive way. It has left its mark on all of us. So what we want to do is we want to consider this event, this time period within Christianity. We want to consider the contributors to this particular period of time and how they and their doctrines or actions have influenced us even to this day. Okay. Now we're going to continue to talk about John Wycliffe, who I believe is one of the most positive characters of the Protestant Reformation. When I say positive, I mean his actions seem to be pure and his motives seem to be honest. I think he had a heart for the people. I think he considered the well-being of the people in everything that he did, even though he was facing some of the what we could call the hypocrisy of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, anytime we study the Reformers, I believe this is almost impossible to negate the fact that their doctrines, their actions were geared as an apology, or if we can even say a refute towards Roman Catholicism. The doctrine of the Roman Church, the practices of the Church in Rome, everything that the Protestants did seemingly was fueled by the hypocrisy and the contention that they had with the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, the term Protestant comes from the root word meaning to protest, and that's exactly what they did. They did not seek to start a new church or start an individual church separate from the church in the Roman Catholic Church. They simply intended to reform the Roman Catholic Church. And because of the unwillingness of the leadership of the time, of course, that didn't happen. There was no reform there. And it resulted in a major division. All right. So we have to look at, and I would hope we can take the time to look at some of the pros and cons of the Protestant Reformation and look at some of the things that were done, and possibly we can see how things may have been done differently. But at the end of the day, the Protestant Reformation has afforded to us some very beneficial privileges, some very helpful privileges that we should be thankful for. And I believe it was God's providence that has afforded us some of these benefits. But the fact of the matter is that not all men are good men, and some bad men will use good things to their advantage. And I think that's what we have to watch out for. But today in this discussion, we want to talk about an issue that many people may not want to talk about, and I'm sure there'll be differences and conflict on this particular issue and its relevance to the church. But in this particular broadcast, this discussion, we want to talk about this issue because it was a major issue of John Wycliffe, and it continues to be a major issue within the church today. And that issue is an issue of church and money. All right. Everyone has a view on how we think money should be used and appropriated throughout the church. According to today's statistics, it's oftentimes used in negative ways than positive. But nevertheless, everyone has a view and has obviously a need for money. And it's no different during the time of John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe lived in a period where the people of England were struggling. They were poverty stricken, and they were very destitute of the fortunes of their society. Now, there was two classes. There was upper class and lower class, and at that time they were feuding against one another because the upper class were oppressing the lower class, and you had situations of high taxation and higher cost of living with no increase of pay. So you can imagine what happened there whenever the cost of living increases, but there is no means of increasing the income. So, of course, the things that they may have been used to or the things that they once afforded, they could not afford any longer. The fact of the matter is that the contributions of the government and the church caused great frustration to John Wycliffe. In fact, he was very puzzled at how we could have such a poor society and such a rich church. Now, that seems to me to be a huge contradiction. I don't understand how the people of God's family can be so deprived in the social and economic field, but the church in that same society can be so rich. John Wycliffe could relate to this quandary, and he too had a problem with it. In fact, he would suggest to the clergymen, because at the time the clergymen were living as kings, and the Pope was, of course, very wealthy. And some of the agendas that the church's money was used for were of no scriptural support. In fact, they used the church's money to fund carnal events, carnal propaganda, and things were not spiritual at all. And John Wycliffe could not rationalize how the church could be partaking such carnality whenever their people were suffering. So John Wycliffe would suggest that the clergymen, the Pope, and all of the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church who were confiscating the money that were supposedly or supposed to be used for the benefit of the community, the Christian community, he suggested that they live a life of poverty and live after the example of Jesus Christ and the apostles. Now, there are many different beliefs that Jesus was rich and Jesus lived a very lavish life, a life of wealth, and we define that based on our definition of wealth today. But needless to say, there's no biblical support showing where Jesus lived a lavish lifestyle as defined by our modern society. I don't see anywhere where Jesus lived in the type of wealth, or in any wealth for that matter, that we would be so intrigued to live the same way. Now, the thing about it is Jesus actually lived a poverty life, and he called his disciples to live a poverty-stricken life. When we say poverty, we mean a life that is absent of all the riches and fame and wealth of the society. He told them that their job was to go from place to place and to spread the good news of the kingdom. And that's what they did. And whenever you have people like John Wycliffe reading these types of things in the Bible, of course, questions begin to rise, and people begin to wonder at how and why the leaders of that time were living different lives in comparison to Jesus Christ and his apostles. And these are questions that our society have forgotten to ask. We don't ask those questions any longer. In fact, we are so enticed by the lifestyles of our leaders and the ones we hold of high esteem, that we rather not ask that question, and we rather discover how we can live as they live. But if we be honest and we compare and we actually take the Bible for what it's saying and for what it's worth, we'll find that the life that Jesus lived was very unpopular, and it would be unpopular rather in our time. And many people would not at once, in one instance and in any instance, submit themselves to such a lifestyle. Well, whenever you're looking at the church and you see that they are beyond wealth, they are just completely filthy rich, and everyone in their community is suffering and funding the propaganda of the church, then you begin to rethink what the purpose of all this money is really for. Now, this is the thing about it. The money that was gathered off of false doctrine. The doctrine stated of the Roman Catholic Church and the tradition held that if one wanted to secure their soul, they had to buy indulgences and icons, and if they wanted to make it into heaven, they could be forgiven of their sins by purchasing their way into heaven. And John Wycliffe addressed this issue by advising that there is no such doctrine, and that the monks and the friars, as they would come throughout the villages to collect money through biblical exposition, even though it was wrong exposition and false doctrine, they used the Bible to control the people to do what they wanted them to do. And they used the Bible to collect from people, even college students and kids and elderly, widows. All these things were done because there was an agenda and there was a policy put forth by the Roman Catholic Church to take money from the people in order to fund their endeavors. And I don't know if we will ever get away from that type of heresy. Even today, we are so driven by the economy and so driven by the society, and we are so used to being driven by the market. I don't know if we'll ever be able to escape from the grasp of American culture, American society. However, I would say this, that the church has to realize that even though we are part of such a nation and such a Western, even those in the Western civilization, even though we're here and we're caught in this type of lifestyle, that does not excuse us from the responsibility that we have towards one another. And I can imagine that John Wycliffe would look at the Bible and compare what he saw in his society, within his Christian community, to what the Bible actually says. And there's many examples in the book of Acts that shows where the poor would give what they had to, the rich would give what they had to the poor. They would sell their possessions and bring it to the apostles' feet because they understood that there was a need for people in the community. They considered that the people in that community were literally their brothers and sisters in Christ, meaning that they had a personal and a communal responsibility towards that person. And I want to say this. I'm of the opinion that the reason for the divisions within Christianity is not because we're so different. It's not because we believe so differently. But I believe the differences are mainly because we refuse to share the typical and common struggle of everyday people in a way that will bring us together. This is what the first century church literally did. They took their belongings, sold it, gave it to the poor, so that there would be no classifications within the community, but everybody lived the same way. Everybody lived the same way and faced the same struggles and difficulties and persecution, so that the burden was not handled based on classifications, but the burden was handled by the whole of the community. In doing so, they placed their reliance solely on Jesus Christ. And that is to say, a common community is a Christ-centered community. Wherever there is a communal or a type of common lifestyle, you can assure yourselves that Jesus Christ will be at the center of that community, because that type of approach to living with one another allows everyone to focus on the presence, the objective, the purpose, and the character of Jesus Christ, so that now they're provoked to help one another. They're provoked to assist one another. I think if we're not careful, we'll miss the whole point of what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ. And I want you to think about it this way. When is the last time you stood up in your church and had a member to say, I'm short on my light bill this month. I need help. If anybody's willing to help me, please help me. Nobody does this. Well, when's the last time you've heard somebody say, I need my medication. I'm short on money this week. If you will allow me, if someone will just lend me the money till next week, I'll be sure to pay you back. We don't hear these type of things because we are so afraid of being scrutinized and being labeled and being talked down and being looked down upon. Because we face the normalcies of life, we feel like we are deprived in some way. But that was far from the community of the Bible, the church of the Bible. The community in the first century understood something, that everyone was facing difficulties. Everyone was facing challenges. Everyone was going through hard times. Everyone was under the same society, under the same rule, under the same government. They were subject to the same laws, but they had the same hope. They had the same belief. They had the same king. And not just a king, but an eternal king that left them commandments and helped them to understand what it really meant to be a follower and child of God. So what did they do? They lived out what it meant to be that. They actually expressed that within the community, and they followed the commandments of Jesus Christ. So we have to kind of consider these things. I don't think that God would be pleased with us in harvesting all this money just to do I don't know what with. I don't think he would be pleased if we had all this money. And really, the church of today in American society and Western civilization is one of the richest institutions in the world. But yet, you have such poverty in America. You have such depravity in America. All types of situations that are just socially and economically challenging to the people of the church. And that just doesn't make sense to us. I mean, do we really have to have big churches? Do we really have to have fancy cars? Do we really have to have the best equipment? Do we really, 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 really have to have the greatest furniture? Do we really have to have the strobe lights and all the things that we have? That's something to think about. If it meant feeding a family for a year, do you really have to buy that expensive suit? If it really meant feeding a family that struggles from day to day, or paying someone's medical bills who can't afford their medicine, I mean, would it really be worth investing all this money into all this material things if we can use that money to help people in the community, in our church, that needs it more than those who are a little more privileged than others? These are the type of things that John Wycliffe experienced and faced in his ministry. These are the types of things that he said to the clergymen. He encouraged them to sell their goods, give up their lavish lifestyle, give up the cares of the world so that they can be a benefit to the people of God in the way that God has commanded us to be. What the church in Acts did was a commendable thing. It was a beautiful thing. We see all of God's children coming together to help one another. And that's something that we all must do. So I would like to encourage you to look down deep in your heart and find a way to help someone else that may need it. I'm sure by doing it, you will find the fulfilling purpose that God has destined for all of us to experience, because he has called us to love one another and love him. And to love him is to love our brothers and our sisters. So we hope that there's been something said today to encourage you, to enlighten you, and give you a great inspiration to study God's word. Until next time, follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on SoundCloud, and follow us as we follow Christ. Thank you for watching. Until next time, God bless.